Hello, and welcome to another episode of Be a Leader podcast, where we talk about current issues in military, sports, and business through the leadership lens. Happy New Year's to all of you. I'm excited for this new year. It's the first podcast episode for this new year. So today we are going to talk about Operation Absolute Resolve, about what happened here recently on January 3rd, 2026. There was explosions in Caracas, Venezuela. And by a few hours later, Nicolas Maduro was no longer in Venezuela. So we're going to talk about that. Most people saw explosions, but if you're a leadership person, you know there's a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes, and those are the things that we're going to look at. So 2 quick notes before we move on and dive into it. The first thing is something that was hammered on me and my fellow candidates when I was in the United States Marine Corps Officer Candidate School in Quantico, Virginia, and that is military serves politics. So we're given the mission. That's our job, and it serves politics. Military politics doesn't serve military. Otherwise, it'd be like a dictatorship like that was at Venezuela. So military serves politics. So I'm not going to talk about whether it's right or wrong, about what happened. I'm just going to be looking at the execution and what we can learn from it. The second part is a very high level of the history of Venezuela. There was prosperity for about 40 years. They were economically doing very well. And around 1998, 1999, that's when Hugo Chavez took over. He was elected president, and he started to dismantle a lot of the things of Venezuela, especially the Constitution. He wanted to rewrite the Constitution to give him more power. And when that started to happen, he essentially became a dictator, and the economy went very downhill. He died in 2013, and that's when Nicolas Maduro took over. And so for roughly about 25 years, there has been dictatorship in Venezuela, which has caused a lot of people to flee, right? A lot of refugees. So, and one other topic when I was thinking about this, I was talking to a friend of mine from Venezuela. His mother-in-law, very advanced in age, just under 100 years old, was praying that things would change. And then when the news broke out Saturday, she was so jubilant that she got her best dress, got a bunch of friends and family. They had a party to celebrate. Later that evening, went to Mass, and during Mass, fainted and died a few hours later. She never thought she would actually be able to see the end of Maduro before she died. And so just a very strange, you can't make this stuff up. So, what people saw versus what actually happened, it seems like it might have been an overnight success, but overnight successes aren't really a thing. It takes months. It can take years for what we would see as an overnight success. They defined the problem. They had to really intimately understand Maduro, what he was doing. They needed access within his inner circle. They built replicas. They rehearsed. They had to wait for conditions. So many things that happened. It wasn't just a one-night raid. All right, we're going to talk about why it was a successful raid from a leadership standpoint. So the first reason why this operation was a success was they defined the problem first. Okay, it's easy to rush into problem solving, but if you rush into problem solving, then you might solve the wrong problem. In this case, they knew Maduro had to leave to get some change from Venezuela. Yes, they focused on diplomacy first. That's going to be more on the political side, looking at diplomacy, but military was a backup option. And within the military, they had to understand who Maduro was. They had to understand his pattern of life, what he ate, what he wore, the people that were around him, what type of things he was doing, where he was sleeping, where he was working. They had to really understand who he was to be able to pull off this mission. I think about CEOs launching products to solve a problem, but they don't fully understand their customers. Maybe their customers' tastes have changed a little bit, and they just don't understand the customers yet. Or maybe athletic coaches trying to add a new layer of offense. So when they don't really understand why the current offense isn't working or what their strengths and weaknesses of their current players are, it's too easy as a coach to say, we need better players. Or have you heard this? We just need more money. Yes, that'd be great. But what can you do with the things that you have? Okay, you must observe, you must watch, you must understand what you have, your strengths and weaknesses. Okay, I also think about my time at University of Michigan when I worked for John Beeline's staff as a head manager of the basketball team, and to scout for the opponents. Every opponent was assigned to one of the assistant coaches, and that assistant coach would have to watch several of the most recent basketball games to really see where they truly were at. And they would create a 2-page front and back colored detailed scouting report that had all the information of the individual players, obviously the team trends and what they did, but every single player, there was a picture of them, talked about where they're from, how they played, their statistics, what to expect from them, how to shut them down. and the details on how the team operated together so that you really get to understand who you're going up against. That preparation is so important so you have confidence going in. Amateurs just like to rush into solutions, okay? But professionals need to observe to understand what the problem really is. Okay, you cannot solve what you have not clearly defined. And that'd be the question I have for you right now. Is there somewhere in your life, in your work, in your career that you're rushing to problem solve, but you haven't spent the time defining the problem, observing, asking questions and probing? That leads us to the second reason why this was a success. After they observed, then they rehearsed. Okay, the rehearsal, they rehearsed this mission. And we can call it, for them, it's the enemy. It could be your opponent. It could be the competitor, but you rehearse. And why you rehearse is respect. It's respecting the mission. It's respecting the enemy, the opponents, the competitor. It is respect. It's not about perfection. Okay. You do this because the stakes are high, because it matters. Okay. What did they do? Well, they built a full replica of the compound where Maduro lived. They practiced rehearsing going in and out over and over again. They found all the friction points. They found all the issues that could happen. Then they started to build contingencies around it to ensure mission success, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But they went over it and over it and over it. I remember my time in the Marine Corps when we were practicing these big executions. There were so many levels that we would do. You start with the order, right? The order told everyone what their job, the big picture of their job was, right? Their task and their purpose. Then soon after that, we'd have this as big as we could make, SAM model. And we do what's called a rehearsal of concept, where everyone would step in the model and talk about what they would do. And there's all these players, they have to do it. And there's so many issues that came up. And there's everyone writing notes and saying, I got to figure this out. I'll get back to you. I'll figure this out. I'll get back to you. Then they figure this stuff out. And then we come back for round 2 of the rehearsal concept to make sure it's smoother. And then if we had ability for technology, we have a computer simulation where everyone's behind computers and everyone's acting in this computer game looking thing to simulate to make sure everything is smooth. Then from there, you take all the actual, not just the leaders, but the whole unit, all the units together, and you do a dry run. So everything without live ammunition, and you run through that wherever you could, right? And then finally, you do the live thing with real ammunition, real bombs, and real everything. Where the tanks are going, shooting over, the crunchies running, and there's artillery strikes, and there's aircraft, and everything's coming in, all live. We practice it, and then we go live. The rehearsal, we do it because it matters. Why? Because you don't rise to the occasion. Okay, I just don't tell all those guys to integrate in there with those live bullets. No, you don't rise to the occasion. You fall to your lowest level of training. So your job is to bring that lowest level of training as high as possible through rehearsal so that confidence is set. You understand everyone's working in the same direction. Okay? Confidence without rehearsal is arrogance. It's dangerous. And winging it when other people's trust is on the line is dangerous. Okay, it's gambling. I go back again to my time with Michigan basketball team. We had like 12 players. And you have your main rotation, the guys that are playing the games, and you have usually the bench guys that don't play. And those guys, we would create a scout team. So we'd have at least 5 guys and it'd be a scout team. So that assistant coach that was in charge of scouting for the other team, they would bring in those 5 guys and they would show them the main plays the other team ran, the way they played defense, the inbounds plays they would have. They would also assign, okay, you're the best shooter, you're the best driver, you're the best post guy, and they'd practice that. And then we bring the whole team together, and the rotational players who played the games will play against the scout team to get a taste of what it's like to play against the other team. Right? It's the best way you could do that. And we did it because it was important. In my programs, my leadership programs, I do role playing because it's important. I don't want to just talk about these things. I want you to know what it feels like to have the pressure, to have to make the decisions, and to stand by them. Role playing is so important. And that's what they did. So remember, rehearsal is not about perfectionism. It's about respect, about your mission and who you're going up against. Okay? You don't want to wing it when other people's trust is in the line. And the question I have for you right now is, what is some big moment coming up for you that you are planning on winging it rather than rehearsing it? Okay? Prepare, rehearse, be ready for it. That leads to the third reason why this was a mission success, because once they planned and observed and they rehearsed, they start to find issues or challenges, and they have overwhelming support enabled this execution success. Okay, in other words, they set themselves up for success. Great leaders don't just plan for success. You have to plan for everything that goes wrong. It's not about being pessimistic. It's about being responsible. Okay. What do? They had over 1,000 military members support this one mission. They had 150 aircraft from 20 different locations support this one mission. They had electronic warfare that helped them out. They hit critical infrastructure. They set the conditions up for success. They were able to shut down the power there in Caracas for a few hours so they could be under dark. Okay. They had so many levels of redundancy to make sure that this worked well. Okay. This was not overkill. It was insurance. It was saying, this is so important. We have to get this right. Let's do everything we can to make sure this goes right. They did suppression of enemy air defense, which means the enemy is going to have these defenses to shoot against aircraft. So they shut those down so the helicopters could come in. The helicopters are there to drop off the operators. The operators go in, they get the targets. They bring them back in the helicopters. They escaped. No Americans were killed in this operation. So every worst case was addressed by having redundancy in some element. Personnel, aircraft, other asset. It was all part of that deal. Okay. I remember my time in the Marine Corps. Again, I don't just send a squad to fight alone. Conditions are set. Usually it's with aircraft, deep targets. Then it's going to be firepower, surface-to-surface firepower, artillery-enabled gunfire. Then you want to send out your recon, your tanks, and your amphibious warfare vehicles with the crunchies, the grunts. And the grunts and the infantry guys come out. I mean, the grunts come out towards the very end of the whole thing. You have to set up all these things, all these conditions, which we'll talk about here, point number 4 soon. But there's many things that are set up for it. Okay, you set them up for success. That's what leadership does. And I see this oftentimes where leaders fail. They don't set their people up for success. Okay, maybe there's something that's a critical mission, but they don't give the resources to that team to do it. And they say, well, just figure it out. Do more with less. If you're good enough, you'll make it happen. How many times did I hear that? They're not setting up their people for success. If it's that important, set your people up for success. If it's not that important, then why are you doing it in the first place? Set your people up for success. Okay? It's too easy to not set them up and then blame them when it fails and then just go on to the next one. Set them up for success. Remember, great leaders don't just plan for success. They have to plan for everything that goes wrong. And that's the question I have for you here. Where are you under-resourcing something that's so important to you and your team? You're not setting up for success. Think about what you can do differently to set them up for success. And this leads up to the 4th thing on the reason why this operation was a success. The conditions were set. In other words, the most important things that had to be in place were in place before they launched. And this is super important. Okay, I'm going to emphasize this again. It's super important for conditions to be set. The clearest example was when they launched. The goal was for Christmas Day. The weather wasn't good for all the aircraft. They waited. The next plan was for New Year's Day. Weather wasn't good enough. They aborted the mission again. They waited. Then towards the evening of January 2nd, with anticipation with the weather for January 3rd, the conditions were set and they were a go. But I want you to think about what this means. Again, there was over 1,000 military personnel supporting this. There was 150 aircraft from 20 different base locations supporting this. You had these operators that have been training over and over and over and over, knowing they could go in and die in this mission. And they're told, wait again, wait some more. If you've never been in a combat situation, understanding what that feels like, where that might be your last moment, where you might not come back, is very hard. And continuously being told to wait is very hard. Okay. But this is where many leaders fail. Maybe they did prepare. They planned, they rehearsed, but they weren't patient for the conditions to be set. Okay. It's the discipline not to act. It can be so tricky. This can be so hard because the ego wants it. Like, I need to make it done. Or maybe the calendar, I got to get it done by this date. Or the pressure from other people. Oh, we got to get it done now. But the conditions aren't set. Okay. We feel it, but the conditions matter. They're so important. I think about the Afghanistan pullout. It's a classic example. The pullout had to be done by August 2021, but the conditions weren't set. And what happened? The pullout was a disaster. Marines died. Because leadership was terrible on that one. Conditions were not set on this point alone. See this with startups that happen sometimes. They have great products. The investors are asking questions. The market's not ready, but they feel like they have to do it because that's what they do. And they go and they launch and it's a flop. Doesn't mean the product was bad, just the market wasn't ready. And I know this from my experience building a space hardware startup. Like we launched a product and the market was not ready. It was a great product. Okay, this happens. Conditions need to be set. Discipline is knowing when not to act. And every amateur wants to pull trigger. But if you're a great professional, you know that you gotta wait for the conditions to be set to execute. That's leadership. Again, remember, discipline is knowing when not to act. Okay, conditions need to be set. Not the conditions need to set the timeline, not your ego, not the pressure, not the calendar. And that's where I ask you again, where are you acting now? Pushing things to happen because of ego, because of calendar, because of pressure, rather than being ready for the conditions to be set. And before we wrap this up, I do want to acknowledge one thing, especially for those that serve in Afghanistan and Iraq. I myself was in Iraq, is we have the experience of spending so much your whole being. People died to change regimes in these countries. And then afterwards, there was no good plan or it just didn't execute well. And there was kind of disasters in the back end. You can look at Afghanistan, you can look at Iraq. And so, yes, there is a lot of pause. I'm hearing this from my Venezuelan friends too. Overjoyed, Maduro's no longer there. But what's next? It's a very valid question. And as leaders, we should be asking that question and observing what is going to be happening and learn from this. What is their plan? Because it is very hard to change a culture. In sports, you bring in different players. In companies, you bring in new leaders, right? In a country, that's really hard, especially when a lot of the talent has left the country for the last 25 years. When people that are still in the country are used to being run by a dictator for 25 years. That is going to be really hard. You could argue it's probably the hardest thing that humanity has to do. Forget the moon, okay? How do you bring a culture and change it back to its roots when people have moved on or have died along the way? It's going to be very hard. That is a big challenge, big leadership challenge. We should all have very focus on that. I look forward to maybe talking about that in the future and what we see. So these are our main takeaways in this episode. First one, and again, on the success of this operation of taking Maduro out. The first one, observe and understand before acting. I spent a lot of time observing Maduro, what his way of life was, what he did, where he lived, what he ate, what he wore, all those things. They really needed to understand him. The second was rehearse like it matters. Have respect for your opponent, for your competitor, for your enemy. Rehearse, rehearse, rehearse until you don't get it wrong, right? Third one, build support systems. They built redundancy. Through their rehearsal, they found areas that were problem areas, and they built redundancy in it. They had a huge support system. Where are you not supporting your team or your mission enough? Okay. They built a great support system, and it helped in the execution and success of this mission. And the fourth one, wait for conditions set. It's too easy to just launch because you want to, because your ego, because the timeline, because the pressure. Wait for conditions set. They did, and it contributed to their mission success. Anyways, that's all for today's episode of Be a Leader podcast. And remember, whether you're leading yourself, leading others, or leading leaders, be a leader. My name is Daniel Pinedo. Thank you, and until next time. And before you go, I have a free masterclass to help you become the person who follows through in 2026. If you have been really challenged by something that's super important to you and you haven't been able to do it, it's probably because you haven't changed. You're the part of the problem and you need to change it. If you don't know how, I invite you to this free 1-hour masterclass where I show you the key ingredients to how to become the person who follows through to finally make that thing that's important to you become a reality. Take a look at the description below to get details on how to sign up. I invite you to that. Thank you.